So, with the disappointment of Scream 7 and what I believe is a completely wasted opportunity, I wanted to give my take on how would I have done Scream 7 and how would I have connected it to the original trilogy, kind of getting back on track with that. And I think actually going for a real plot rather than just linking it towards the movie industry and with Scream 4, that need for infamy. Now, these are all okay in their own right, I suppose, but as I say, the first trilogy of Scream very much were personal stories with movies sprinkled in, and like I say, that meta, they had fun with it, with the Stab universe, with it culminating in Stab 3. Like I say, I think that first trilogy is the stronger to the new trilogy, and I think Scream 7 kind of missed a real opportunity. It kind of feels like the Star Wars Disney movies, where they didn't quite grasp the concept and, well, fucked it right up. So I want to take this time and talk you through where I would go with Scream 7, what I would have done with Scream 7, and I think that their missed opportunity to do it, I think, has left many fans, myself included, thinking it's probably time just to let it go to sleep. Just off you pop, jab in a cuddle, and maybe reboot it in 10, 15 years or something like that. Honestly, to be fair, most series right now that are being produced by Hollywood, Star Wars for example, probably should just be left for 10, 15 years, get new writers in with appreciation, which is really annoying and upsetting because Kevin Williamson literally wrote the first two and a treatment for the third, but I think he came back for the fourth as well with Wes Craven, and it just seems like, yeah, I've got this whole thing that it was a backlash to fan theories and how excited people got with the whole Stu Macher thing. I'm just going to briefly go over Stu, who was one of the original killers in Scream 1. My theory was he was a complete psychopath, and Billy, at the end, during his spree, seemed to want to actually try and kill him and frame him. We later then find out in Scream 3 that Roman Bridger, Sidney's brother, he coerced Billy Loomis. I don't think he says anything about Stu, which would add sort of weight to that theory that Roman said to Billy, look, you need someone to frame. And in the movie, they were going to frame Sidney's dad, Stu and Billy. But I actually think Billy was trying to frame Stu and simply say, no, he was just a complete psychopath. I know him. He spoke about this, there was warning signs, and boom, there you go. And Billy would have went on. Didn't quite happen. But what did happen was, after Billy went at him with a knife and at him with a phone, Stu attacks Sidney, says that line, I've always had a thing for you, Sid. And then he gets a TV smashed over his head. Now, people have stated, like Killjoy Jake for example, that Stu coming back would be stupid. Well, I would argue that Stu coming back probably would have been smarter than the options that they've taken, I think, over the last couple of times. But it would actually make some of the Scream movies stronger, like Scream 4, 5 and 6, if Stu was alive. Let me get into it. So, in my version of Scream 7, we start with, now I don't know if Sidney's dad's dead, I don't know if they've ever referenced it, but I would go back to making it very personal towards Sidney. This is a personal story like the opening trilogy, and because we do have a returning Stu who is alive, he's very much aimed right at the Prescott family. The idea that they were trying to frame the dad, maybe you could start at the dad's in like a kind of old home, or like he's in his house but he's got help with like a carer for example. He's on the phone to Sidney and he's a lot older, to the point where he's sort of on his deathbed or, approaching that. And instead of enjoying retirement, the past is going to come back. And by focusing it directly on Sidney, yes, obviously there will be people around Sydney's life that's going to be targeted, but Stu very much, this is a revenge mission. I would have Sydney's father and maybe 2 carers at the time, get up the body count, in the retirement or in his own home, getting help. On that night, however, Stu comes back and he makes it very, very clear that 30 years ago, I should have killed you, but I'm taking that off tonight. As he kills the 2 carers, maybe the way he kills them is like passive. He doesn't really give a shit. And maybe we can also see that as the carers are trying to, the phone rings, the carers are trying to get out, we see that there's actually maybe 2 or 3 ghost faces that are surrounding the house, but the real ghost face is Stu, because he wants the revenge. He wants to wipe out the entire family. That's his goal, and he's made it very personal to him. And we would see a Stu marker that has changed over time. So I'll get into that as we go along, right? So the opening kill, we see it's Sydney's dad, 2 carers, and we know that there is more than one ghost face because they're keeping them in the house. And that's when Stu gets to get his revenge, and that's where it can make it very obvious, as he's about to kill the dad. One of the coolest shots I like in the Scream franchise, there's Scream 3, and it's Cotton Weary, and he's been stabbed, he's on the deck, and Ghostface is like, it was a simple game, Cotton. You should have told me where Sydney was, and now you lose. Brings a knife up, and then it cuts to the title, and I think that's so cool. I do my threes like that, based just on that, so it could be very, very obvious that this has been 30 years coming, old man, but don't worry, your daughter will soon join you, for example, and that bitch mum. So we know it's very, very personal. I would want it to be a little bit different than a sort of whodunit. By making it kind of obvious, you kind of ramp it up, because Ghostface isn't like a scattergun approach. He's quite simply going after Sydney's family like this. He'll pepper it as he goes along, but it's simply he's after Sydney, and anyone within Sydney's proximity, they're going to be attacked. We can see that he's obviously got a cult. Part of the movie obviously is going to be the revenge, but another part of the movie for me would be seeing Stu's journey. So as we have the scenes of him going for revenge, I would want to see Stu at the end. Obviously, you need to de-age Matthew Lillard. You see him at the end and he starts twitching, maybe some overlay the older shot, and we hear someone say, this one's still got a pulse, and then we can see Stu's journey in jail, his anger, he's pissed off, and then he starts to remember some of the things that Billy said. Maybe we can even have a scene where we de-age them, get Skeet Ulrich back, and get Roman there, and maybe Stu was there, and Stu hears Roman say, you need to have a fall guy. Now, Stu at the time thought it was Sydney's dad. He then recognises over time, whilst he's in jail, solitary confinement, that it was actually him. He was Billy's fall guy. And he doesn't want to do that. So over the years of him being in jail, he goes from solitary confinement to high level security. He eventually starts to develop a cult of personality. And maybe there's some people, he gets his fan mail and all that kind of stuff, because some people know he's alive, but they've kept it from Sydney. Now you can either say it was a deliberate decision, or it could have been something that was missed, or even have Stu at that point actually has connections with people in high places, so they deliberately shield that Stu's alive from Gail and Sydney, for example. And maybe it's people that he's spent time with, and they've got out of prison, and they start to build up the kind of cult during the time Stu's in. Then we have the Scream 1, 2 and 3 happens as normal, but Stu's in the background. Now, however, we have Scream 4, enough time has passed, 2 of the followers, 2 of the cult of Ghostface that has been grown over that time are Sydney's niece and her simp boyfriend, and they meet Stu in real life. or in jail, and we can see he's a lot more planned, a lot more methodical, and he is the new Roman figure for these young ghost faces, and he helps plan their whole thing with the videotape and all that kind of stuff. And if the plan was to have worked, then Sidney's niece would have been the new Sidney, and what they were going to then do is use that fame to not only help her life but also Stu's life, because she'll have fame, she'll have influence, and maybe if Stu was ever to come out, he could tell his story. One of the scenes could be when they're in the jail, they're having the conversation. Stu asks her to stay behind as, is it Robbie? Can't remember, but as her wee simp helper boyfriend, whatever, as he leaves, Stu tells her to stay back, and he's like, you need to always have a fall guy. Right, that's why she kills him. It was at Stu's. It was Stu. Now we have Scream 5, where we can go back in, and these would all be flashback scenes, and that's where we would have the reveal that, yep, not only was Amber and Richie, I think his name is, doing what they were doing, but they were doing it under the tenure of Stu, who is now out. Because of his influence, it was kept again from Dewey, from Gail, and from Sidney. They kept it under the rug, and it's at that point we could see that, yep, it was him, he killed Dewey. I would have, like, you get a scene, for example, where as he's killing him, it kind of goes into the mask, and we see under the mask, like Iron Man kind of thing, you see inside the mask, and we see it's Stu. And then we hear him say, "It's an honour." Instead of the Ghostface voice, it's his. And then we can add him in. In terms of like Richie's family, it could be the case that the two boys at the beginning of Scream 6 that are killed by Richie's family, they were involved in the cult of Ghostface. And actually, the family are not a part of the cult of Ghostface. They're just using Ghostface for pure revenge. So it could be the case where I actually stepped out of New York, just like you, Sidney, because it turns out my boys weren't good enough. The family wanted to fuck things up. And because I didn't give a shit about those two brats, I decided I would focus on you. And so it then adds that context of Stu, how he got out, how he built himself, and now the plan to take care of Sidney and Sidney's family. Like I say, you can sprinkle in scenes with Sidney's husband, Mark, on duty. He gets attacked, gets killed. Sidney's daughter is attacked, maybe at a party, and that's when we have a bloodbath, and her friends are all dead, but she manages to escape. And then as she's getting towards Sidney, that's when you could potentially introduce Gail. If you need to have Chad and Mindy come back, absolutely do that. But as Gail's trying to get Sidney's daughter back to Sydney, that Ghostface attack, I think it would be quite cool to have a car chase, where you have the cult of Ghostface in one car, maybe even two cars, trying to attack Gail, Chad and Mindy, and then maybe they succeed. Maybe they succeed, they crash the car that they're in, and Gail manages to get Sidney's daughter away. Chad and Mindy stay back, and that's when we see that they are attacked and they are killed. Maybe they do manage to take maybe one or two of them out, but there's just far too many of them. So, I suppose just spitballing, but Gail manages to get Sidney's daughter back to Sidney, who is maybe, there are ghost faces after her as well, so that they've separated them. And then we have Gail, Sidney's daughter, Sidney, back at the house. You can even put it back to the Macker house if you truly wanted to. I think the opening scene with the granddad Pat being killed, or the dad, Sidney's dad being killed, you could then jump to a kind of second open, if you will. And I think the opening for Scream 7, you could quite easily put that in there. So you've kind of got two opens. One's more personal, and one is slightly less personal, because Stu was simply going back to burn his old house down, saying he's done with the past. He's building the future, and those two people are in his house, wrong place, wrong time. You could do. I did like the opening scene, so I wouldn't mind incorporating it for my idea. But here we have the ending, which has Gail, Sydney's daughter, and Sydney, and what's left of the cult of Ghostface. Maybe a couple of them have been taken out during like the attacks, and so there's still quite a few left. Obviously, they've got the advantage. Kill Gail. Gail gets killed first. I would enjoy seeing a legacy character killed off. They're gone. They're not coming back. And for me, I would kill both Sydney, and I would leave it ambiguous as to her daughter surviving. Not like at the end of Scream 1, for example, if we go back and we use that footage, and we hear someone say, "Oh, this one's got a pulse," I would recycle that for the ending. Sydney's protecting her daughter. Maybe, the ghost faces that Gail, Sydney's daughter, and Sydney, as they're being attacked, they're holding their own for a wee bit. They're shooting some of the ghost faces, and so Stu is losing some of his army. He recognises maybe some of them aren't good enough, but he's still like steadfast. He's going to kill Sydney, and at the end, for me, I would have Gail killed. The legacy's done. The nostalgia's done, but we could have someone from the ambulance at the end, Stu and a couple of his ghost faces that have survived. They leave thinking that the job's done. Paramedics get there. Maybe you could even have like Chad survive again, and he's the one that phones the ambulance. But Mindy definitely dies, and we hear the ambulance say, "This one's still got a pulse." And then for me, the ending would be Stu on stage. He's just wrote a book, and he's being questioned about his past, about being a psychopath and all that kind of stuff, and he completely reverses it on Billy. Billy becomes the fall guy, and Stu talks about how Billy was a psychopath. Sydney's mum cheating on him is what put him over the edge. I didn't know what to do. He was threatening me. He was threatening my family. And yeah, I had to do it. And that night when Sydney was there, I was contemplating everything. Like, how do I get out of this? I even cried about my mum and dad. I was being sincere, twisting the narrative, putting in, and plus, Sydney was a cheat. She kept coming on to me. She kept trying to break up me and Tatum, all that kind of stuff. You could quite literally turn it all on its head. And then he could be asked about the Ghostface killings throughout the years and if he's had any involvement. No, I've been in prison. And when I get out, I just tried to live my life out of darkness. And for me, the ending of Scream 7 could be Stu with his newfound fame, his newfound family. But at the second time, maybe we hear, because he didn't know that Chad survived and Sydney's daughter survived, and we maybe see, I keep picturing that, the Norman Bates at the end of Psycho, he wouldn't hurt a fly, and then maybe mid-stage it's panning in, Stu's being told Sydney's daughter has survived along with a Chad, whatever, and it focuses in on Stu. He's got that realisation that the job maybe isn't done. And then towards the end, you could have Stu psyching up some of his ghost faces, letting them know, and we could cut to random people going about their business. A business guy, he opens his suitcase and he's got a ghost face mask. Cut to someone else, they're going into their locker, they've got their ghost face mask. All while Matthew Lillard's kind of doing like this monologue, which tells us Scream will continue, but to which extent? And the idea is, although this is a personal story for Sydney, for Gail, for Stu, there are other people who will have their own personal stories, and they'll take the Ghostface mantle and they'll use it. Just expanded chaos, but the Ghostface would live. And I think that opens things up. We now know Stu has 2 targets that he needs to get rid of, but others within his cult, they'll have targets themselves. so that it would leave it open for different stories. For me, Sydney's story is told, Gail's story is done, it's over. The only person that survives was supposed to be the fall guy from the first movie. Then we can open it up to other movies. That would kind of be where I would go with it, where I would have went with it. Tell me below what you think. If you have any ideas of your own, if you completely hated mine, absolutely, no issues. But yeah, let me know what you think about this idea, and whether you would have preferred that, or is there anything that you would have wanted to see out with it? I would love to know. Anyway, I have been Mr. Luck, and I will speak to you later. Bye-bye.